My recollection.
We've talked a lot about how Austin was so hands-on with his character when he was in ring, and he would get, very particular about the way his character was presented, and he would be very vocal, but he wasn't happy about something. Here, he had really just been doing like raw sheriff skits. He's not nearly as important of a part of the program, and the creative, I could see how he would say was not really his cup of tea. How big of a part of this was him saying, you know what? I'd rather people just remember me being the badass Stone Cold stunning everybody and drinking beer and raising hell instead of doing some of this GM raw sheriff stuff.
I think that was played a part in it, definitely. But Steve couldn't work. Steve's health issues prevented him from being in the ring every night, preventing him from working. And the raw sheriff stuff was Steve's idea. So to be able to continue to do that stuff and make Steve the focal point when you can't realize a return on that investment in house shows or pay-per-views or anything like that, your biggest star is a guy that can't get in the ring and compete. That's, from a company standpoint, that's hard to do. Now, to have that character in there, and do that, that's great. But what's that worth? So that is, again, that is the argument there for Steve. If he wants to go out on top and go out with people remembering him, I don't begrudge that at all. I think that's the way that people should go out, quite frankly, is go out on top on your terms and move on.
What's the reaction in the locker room when Steve Austin leaves?
Next.
Let's keep it moving here.
Really, it was next more than anything. It's like, okay, Steve's gone. Who is there for that next spot? And there wasn't a whole lot of, because he wasn't involved in any programs or anything like that. He was a character, and people just looked at it as, okay, more opportunity for me.
Let's talk a little bit about a major shift backstage. Wade Keller would report the long overworked Jim Ross has been promoted to executive vice president business strategies. According to WWE, he will now work closely with Vince McMahon as an advisor on WWE's core business. John Laurinaitis, aka Johnny Ace, formerly of the Dynamic Dudes tag team in the United States with Shane Douglas, has assumed Ross's duties as vice president of talent relations. Laurinaitis has been working as Ross's assistant in that area for a long time, and many suspected Laurinaitis would take over for Ross eventually in that position. Laurinaitis will now be the point man in management when wrestlers need to ask for a day off, update their injury status, have travel concerns, or want to ask about their latest paycheck. Perhaps more significantly, he replaces Ross as the main person in charge of house show lineups and match finishes, areas he had already been exerting influence over. Ross, of course, remains an announcer on Raw, and before the April 12th Raw, Vince McMahon announced the change to the wrestlers. Jim Ross then gave a heartfelt speech for about 10 minutes about how much working with the wrestlers has meant to him, how everyone has a family-like feel to him, and how he'll still be around. And then he introduced Laurinaitis as his replacement, who also gave a brief speech, where most everyone was already quite familiar with him already. And Laurinaitis was originally in charge of the former WCW wrestlers whose contracts were acquired as part of the buyout from Time Warner. And the idea was at the time for the brands to be separate and for Laurinaitis to be the main person in charge of all those WCW brand talents anyway. But of course, since that phased out, he wound up working with talent, but underneath Jim Ross. Chat me up. How did you think that this would be handled? Was this handled the right way? Were you in favor of this switch? Was it just time for JR to sort of get out of the race car there? I mean, it does feel like a pretty tireless job at times.
Talent relations is the absolute most thankless job in the business. That and creative. But it just, you're the bad guy giving all the bad news. Very seldom do you really get to give any good news, but it's constantly, it becomes a managing of issues and problems. Jim Ross was probably one of the best that ever sat in that chair, and Jim was excellent at it. did very well. But I think Jim was getting tired too of dealing with all the day-to-day bullshit that came with it. Laurinaitis had come in, and Laurinaitis younger, and he wanted it, you know. As much as I like to make fun of John and what have you, John did a great job. Anybody that is in that role and that can stay for longer than 2 weeks, hats off to them. Because it's thankless, it's tireless, it never ends. You are on call 48 hours a day. That's right, not 24 hours, 48 hours every day. Because you got twice as much shit on you. So for JR to get out of that and be able to kind of oversee and do some other things, I think was refreshing for Jim to try and get his creative juices going a little bit more on the business side of things, which Jim liked as well. Putting Laurinaitis there, I think it was the only pick that they had at the time, and it was a good one. John stepped into it and did the job. No matter who's in that job, they are the most unpopular person in the world in the locker room with the talent. Doesn't matter.
What do you think his speech sounded like? I mean, how do you remember it?
JR's or John's?
John's.
Guys, I just want to thank you. And in case you didn't notice, Vince worked buys today. Good God, they're fucking huge. My job to oil them, so don't anybody get excited because I'm already there. By the way, boss, you're fucking vascular as hell. Something like that.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson here to tell you a little more about what adfreeshows.com is all about. Get early, ad-free access to more than a dozen of your favorite wrestling podcasts every single week, starting at just $9. That's less than 20 cents an episode each month. And yes, you can listen to them all directly through Apple Podcasts or your regular podcast apps. How easy is that? Ad-free shows also has thousands of hours worth of bonus content and docuseries like Title Chase, Eric Fires Back, Conversations with Conrad, and The Insiders. Plus new series like The Book with David Crockett, Monday Mailbags with Mike Chioda and Nick Patrick, and a whole lot more. And you want to talk about early? You can't get any earlier than listening to the shows live. You can be a part of the live studio audience as we record the podcast. Plus, ride shotgun alongside your favorite childhood heroes for live watch-alongs, Q&As, and other interactive experiences every single month. Come on now, see for yourself what thousands of other wrestling fans from around the world have discovered, that adfreeshows.com is the best value in wrestling. Check it out today. And hey, when you do, the first week is completely free. adfreeshows.com.